Welcome to the Binge Dietitian podcast. I'm Jonathan, and I'm here to help you end 24/7 food thoughts, binge eating, and actually enjoy life with food. This episode is for educational and informational purposes only, not to be substituted for medical or personalized advice. Check the link in the description for my recovery resources, and let's get straight to the episode. Have you found out that in order to stop binge eating, you have to eat regular meals consistently? If you've already been implementing that, I just want to say well done, because during binge recovery, it isn't easy to make changes and to refocus your goals away from restriction and towards giving yourself freedom. But what if you've been finding yourself still binge eating, even though you're already eating regular meals? You eat decent sized portions. You're ensuring that you're around 7 or 8 out of 10 full by eating your breakfast, your mid-morning snack, lunch, mid-afternoon snack, and dinner. But no matter how hard you do to work your way to eat regular meals, you still find yourself binge eating. I just want to first say that what you're already doing is right, and don't sway away from eating regular meals. And don't be discouraged, because what if I told you that aside from eating regular meals, we can still be restricting? If you've been following me for a while now in this podcast, you would notice I always bring up the quote, "You only binge on foods you restrict on." So have you ever had a craving for a cookie, for example, but you tell yourself that you need to be good, so you avoid that cookie and instead go for an apple, for example? This is mental restriction, and I completely understand why we may naturally tend to avoid the foods we crave. Because in order to recover from binge eating, you might think that we need to start eating healthily, or you might find that these foods that you crave are your trigger foods to binges. If you feel that way, I just want to say that I understand, and you have every right to feel that way. Because after binge eating and restricting for so long, it could seem like the moment that you touch the food, then you're just going to start a whole binge episode. But in order to truly end binge eating, we have to put an end to mental restriction and start to include these forbidden foods into our diet. So here are 3 ways you might still be having mental restriction. Number 1, you still have the mindset of good foods and bad foods. Do you tend to eat only the good foods and try to avoid the bad foods as much as possible, with quotation marks in between, because there's no such thing as good and bad foods? When I mention good foods, what are the first kinds of foods that come into your mind? Broccoli, kale, quinoa, fruits and vegetables? When I mention bad foods, what comes into your mind? Probably pizza, peanut butter, cookies, brownies, cakes. Essentially, these foods that we call bad are oftentimes the foods we normally binge on. What if I told you that this mindset of good and bad foods can contribute to binging? I know that you might have heard good foods and bad foods all over the internet, or in TV, or in a magazine. But what I'm honestly here to tell you is that there's no such thing as good foods or bad foods. All foods have nutrients, and all foods serve us in different ways. Whenever we have the mindset of avoiding bad foods, then the moment we do eat a bad food, we start to associate ourselves as bad. We think of ourselves as guilty, terrible, shameful. This lowers our self-esteem and our mood. And where else can you get a quick boost of mood from? Food. So in short, when we call foods bad, we associate ourselves as bad when we eat them. Then our mood drops, which can be a trigger for binge eating. So let's let go of adding morality to food. The only food that are bad for you are the ones that are expired or you have an allergic reaction to them. So let's give ourselves the permission to eat these foods. Remember, you're much less likely to binge on them because you're already eating regular meals to stay full. But you just need something to keep you satisfied. And that leads me perfectly to number 2, why you're still binging even though you're eating regular meals. You're full, but you're not satisfied. Being full and being satisfied are 2 different things. We can eat regular meals be full, and get on with the day. We can essentially fill ourselves up with any kinds of food, even the ones we dislike. Remember when you were a kid and your parents or guardian might prepare a meal, but you just had to finish it, even though you didn't like it? Well, that's being full and not satisfied. But do you also remember moments where you were served a delicious meal and you couldn't help to ask for seconds? Well, that's being full and satisfied. When you make or prepare your meals, make sure they're delicious. Don't try to make them as low calorie as possible. Try to focus on foods that you enjoy. If you find yourself having chicken breast and you find it a bit bland and boring, go for a chicken thigh or chicken drumsticks. If you feel that adding more oil to a meal would make it more delicious, or adding a delicious sauce to it would also make it more delicious, then go for it. Add the things that make it more delicious. Another idea is to end your meal with a dessert to make sure you end your meal satisfied. You could have a slice of cake or a muffin, for example. Having a dessert after your meal with one of the foods you normally binge on is a perfect time to start feeling safe around these foods, to feel safe around your binge foods or your trigger foods, because you're much less likely to binge on them if you're full. Let's focus on food as an experience, not just as function. When we look forward to making our meals as delicious as possible, our body will have no reason to crave for a binge episode because you're keeping your body full and satisfied. Number 3, you're just simply avoiding the food in fear of it triggering a binge. So you may have noticed that I mentioned this a few times earlier, but it's so important for me to bring this all back that you should not fear foods. Give yourself permission to have the foods you crave. Normal eating looks like giving ourselves full permission to have the foods we want and crave. There's a reason why your body's craving them. It's because you're depriving your body of it. Our body wouldn't crave something for no reason. I can back this up with a study, and studies show that if we deprive ourselves of food, we're going to want them even more. We start to have intense cravings for them. And on the other hand, exposing ourselves to these foods can actually cause us to turn these forbidden foods into neutral foods. They don't actually become that special or important anymore if we're just simply treating them as a food that we eat normally. This is called food habituation. So remember, if you're already eating regular meals by now, you're much, much less likely to overeat on these kinds of foods because you're keeping yourself at a 7 or 8 out of 10 in the fullness scale. But I just want to put a little disclaimer that if you've been depriving yourself so long with these kinds of foods, I want you to know it's only natural that you'll want to eat a little more than you think you might, just to catch up on what you're missing on. But this is completely temporary, and I want you to know that. Avoid any feelings of guilt because you completely deserve to take care of your body. So I can promise you that if you're avoiding mental restriction, you will eventually find balance with your eating. I want you to know that self-compassion is always key. I want you to know that normal eating does not look like eating the same things and the same amount of food every day. It looks like eating more on certain days when you feel like you have a bit more of a craving, or eating less on certain days. And that's all dictated by your cravings and your hunger, which can fluctuate. What is important is that you're honoring your hunger and your cravings. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode. And I just want to add that if you want to work with me to help end your binge eating, I do a free discovery call, which is 15 minutes, to see if we can work together, which can be booked in the link of the description of this podcast. I would also really appreciate it if you rated this podcast for others to find. So, once again, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. What if I told you you can end binge eating and still keep all the foods you love without dieting, without willpower, and no more meal plans? Check the link in the description for my exclusive self-paced Binge Freedom Blueprint online course to learn everything I wish I knew when I struggle with binge eating. It's all packaged into one platform to make it easy to transform your life right now.